Let's now turn our attention to a few of the dominant theories of development. There are, of course, many theories in psychology that relate to development, but for the purposes of our exam, for the CLEP exam, we're just going to highlight a few of the key figures. We begin with the research of Jean Piaget. Piaget was a French theorist and a French psychologist, developmental psychologist, whose contributions are still referred to today as being quite accurate in their assessments. So let's go through some of Piaget's theories. His cognitive development theory focused on the changes that occur in a child from birth up until their teens in terms of how they view the world cognitively, how they think about the world, and how they relate to the world. So in Piaget's theory, at birth, a child enters into the sensory motor stage. It is during this stage that a child is getting all of their information about the world from their senses. So you might have a child in your home or have a younger sibling, and you watch them crawl around and they grab everything they can and put it into their mouth. They are tasting things, they are smelling things, they are trying to rub and touch things. That's because they're trying to get information through their senses. And this occurs roughly through the second year of life. One thing that is notable on Piaget's theory is this idea of object permanence. So at the early stages of the sensory motor process, a child does not have object permanence, which means that if I take a blanket and I cover a doll, the child in the early stages will not know that that doll is still there. They don't believe that the object is permanent. They imagine it's disappeared because they don't have that cognitive capacity to know that if something is out of sight, it is still in existence. As the child progresses, maybe it's closer to 1 year old, they have this ability, they develop the ability for object permanence, knowing that even if I put it behind my back, if I put my cell phone behind my back, that it is still there and I know how to go after it. I have a son who's about a year, and he's unfortunately very interested in the cell phone, and so I'm constantly hiding it from him, but he knows where it is wherever I move it because he has developed object permanence. Now, at 2 years old, a child enters into the pre-operational stage, otherwise kind of known as a pre-logical stage. It is during this state that a child is very egocentric. This term, egocentric, means that the child is very much focused on themselves. It's all about me. Nothing else really matters but me, is the inner experience of a child. And that's a crucial part of this stage of development. A child in this stage is starting to use symbolic thought and very much depends on symbolic thought. So they're using imagery and words to begin to relate to the world, as opposed to a 1 year old, they're not using words, they're not able to draw a picture or understand what a picture or a number represents. That comes about through the pre-operational stage that we're discussing now. One other very important feature of this state is the inability to understand conservation. So imagine, if you would, that I have a slice of cheese. And I take this slice of cheese, and in front of a child, I cut it in half. I now show the child that I have 2 halves of cheese, and I show it next to the larger piece of cheese. And I might ask them, which has more cheese, the pile on the left or the pile on the right? And if the child responds generally that, well, this pile here has more cheese, it is because they do not have this idea of conservation. In reality, it is the same amount of cheese, but they don't have that cognitive capacity. The same as if I put in a cup of water, a tall glass of water. So we'll go over here. If I have a tall glass of water and it's filled up till this point with water, and then I take that same water and I pour it into a long cylinder. And the water then fills up to this point. and I ask the child which has more water, they will oftentimes say the tall glass because it looks taller, even though it has the same amount of water, and that is due to an inability to understand conservation. They will develop this ability as they reach around 6 or 7 years old, and we turn to our next two stages. The concrete operation stage is when logical rules begin to take hold in a child. So they understand the idea that if you do this, then that will happen, that there are logical rules to the world around us. They start to understand mathematics. They start to understand the ability to use logic to solve various problems, both academically and in their personal lives. Finally, Piaget spoke about a formal operations stage. And this stage is entered at age 12 years old, or thereabouts, when a child is able to think in hypothetical terms, to think with a scientific mindset about abstract principles. So it is here that a child can understand something like, don't throw a stone at glass walls. Or if you tell them, birds of a feather flock together. What does that mean? It means that people who are alike generally spend time together, and this is an abstract concept that only a child in this formal operation stage is able to grasp. And Piaget said this is the indication that they've reached the final stage of development as far as cognitive skills, and from there on out, we're pretty solidified, according to Piaget. Let's turn to another very influential theorist who we've discussed in previous modules, and his name is Sigmund Freud. In the late 1800s, Sigmund Freud developed the psychoanalytic theories of psychology. The first major theories to come about to explain the human psyche were put forward by Sigmund Freud. And although today they're not necessarily as revered or as referred to as some other theorists, they remain very influential in the broad field of psychology. So we'll first start off with Freud's psychosexual theory. Freud believed that all of us have an energy source in us. And that energy source, known as Eros, also can play a role in our sexual development when it takes the form of libido. Libido is the sexual energy. Eros is the life energy, or general life force. So in Freud's psychosexual theory, he said that the libido, the sexual energy, starts out at birth in the mouth, in the oral area. And it is during this phase where all pleasure is received from the oral cavity of the body. So this is when babies are breastfeeding, they are sucking their thumbs, they're grabbing everything they can and they just stick it inside of their mouth. Glasses, pens, cell phones, dirt, really doesn't matter. But because they get pleasure, according to Freud, from this particular area of the body. And this is when we have the pleasure principle, where everything operates over what I need and I need it now. At 1 years old, Freud said that the libido moves to a different area, to the anal area. And this is when a child seeks pleasure from controlling their bodily functions by holding in and letting go of their waist. This creates, according to Freud, a sense of pleasure. And it is through toilet training and other interactive social experiences that a child starts to develop and learns the principles of, that are necessary to help them guide through their life. Next, the libido moves to the phallic area. And this is when sexual desires start to turn towards people of, according to Freud, the opposite sex. Freud didn't address really in his time so much about same-sex or homosexuality or other than heterosexuality. And he said that this is where energy focuses in the genital area, and a child has to overcome a very important challenge called the Oedipus complex, as well as the Electra complex, where basically they develop a sense of desire for the parent of the opposite sex. So a young boy, he says, starts to develop a desire for his mother, and then looks towards his father and says, wait a minute, you're a competing energy to me. You're a competing being. I want to try to get you out of the picture, Dad. But then the child learns that I really can't beat my father in a battle because he's much larger than I am. Therefore, I affiliate with my father, and I'm like my father. And therefore, they resolve this Oedipal complex and are able to pass through this phallic stage. There's a lot more details to this, but we're not going to go into it for the sake of the CLEP exam. The last two stages that Freud talks about are the latency and genital phases. During the latency phase, Freud said that this libido, the sexual energy, actually enters into a dormancy phase. It's quieted down. There's not much sexual activity or energy being exerted in these 6 to 12-year-old period, according to Freud. It is during this stage that the superego develops, as well as the conscious thinking patterns. Finally, the libido emerges during the genital phase. This is when a child enters puberty and the sexual energy focuses on more appropriately with the opposite sex. And this is the final stage according to Freud, psychosexual stages. The last theorist that we'll talk about in this section is Erikson. Erikson was also originally from the psychoanalytic school of thought, and he wrote his theories in the 40s and 50s and even beyond that. And Erikson focused not just on the first, let's say, 12 years of life, which is when Freud focused. Erikson believed that we have to talk about the human being from 0 to death. And he came up with 8 stages of development. According to Erikson, in each stage we have a mission, we have a goal, where we have to resolve a certain battle. In the first stage, for example, we battle with the sense of trust versus mistrust. A child, when they're born, has to figure out, can I trust my environment? Can I trust that the adults around me will take care of me properly? If they do, well then, I have a sense of trust in my life. If, however, the adults don't take care of me well, then I may not be able to trust my environment. And maybe my environment is not reliable and I have a sense of mistrust that will stay with me through the next stages. He talked about a stage called autonomy versus shame and doubt. At 1 year old, a child starts to become autonomous. They start to crawl around and they start to figure out, can I get around my environment by myself in an autonomous way? If so, excellent, you've achieved that state. If not, a child might have a sense of shame, a sense of doubt, that they aren't able to be independent in their environment. Next stage is this sense of initiative versus guilt. At 3 to 5 years old, is a child able to kind of state a sense of purpose at school? Can they set a goal in school that they're going to learn the alphabet? And through learning the alphabet, they're able to achieve a sense of initiative, or will they actually have a sense of guilt? I'm not like the other children. I'm not able to figure out these problems, and therefore I might have a sense of guilt that I will carry with me through the next stages. Industry versus inferiority is the next stage. We'll jump forward to identity versus role confusion, because this is the most important stage according to Erikson. This is when a child has to, or at this point, excuse me, I meant to start over here, identity versus role confusion. This is when a child has to develop their sense of self, their sense of identity. If they're able to establish a sense of who am I, who do other people think I am, then their identity is strong and established. Otherwise, they may enter into their next stages of life being very confused about who they are, having a sense of role confusion. Intimacy versus isolation has to do with relationships and intimacy with others. Generativity versus stagnation is the next stage that's accomplished from 36 to 55 years old, roughly. Do I have a sense of, can I generate success in my life? Do I have care? Do I have empathy, concern, and caring for others? And finally, the last stage is integrity versus despair. At the end of life, does a person have a sense that I have a sense of integrity in my life? I've accomplished. Who am I? What have I achieved? Or perhaps they have a sense of despair, and they may be very sad at the end of their life because they have not accomplished what they had set out to do. This brings us to the conclusion of this chapter. I'll scale back just to one other slide. This is the end of this section of the theories of development. There's a lot of information. Take your time to study these. Go into the details of the theorists because they can make confusing. And feel free to review this particular piece a few times over. Okay, good luck.